everyone, Ariel Adams here with aBlogtoWatch. Thank you for listening to the Superlative Podcast. Today, my guest is Matt Hranek. Matt is a watch writer. I'll call you a stylist, even though that's not the most prestigious name. I think you are. You're the founder of the William Brown Project. You're a man of humor, good humor. That's high in the list. I understand you're very particular about what you like to drink, you like to travel, and food is very important to you. What am I missing?
I'm a sensitive Cancer crybaby.
I'm also a Cancer.
When's your birthday?
June 29th.
July 21st?
Okay.
I'm at the cusp, but
we're at the opposite ends of it, right?
Yeah. Are you a sensitive crybaby? I don't see you as that.
I'm sensitive, but I don't cry a lot. But I subscribe to the basically what I learned as a teenager from Bob Marley, which is that no woman, no cry. So that's where all the strongest crying emotions ever came from. Other than that, just the man part of my life, not a lot of crying.
Okay, well, I must be the other opposite end of the Cancer spectrum, but no, you nailed it. The hustle's real, Ariel. Like, I wear many hats currently. So
now, one of the things that I find so fascinating about what you do is the variety of things you've done. I see you at watch events, but my understanding is that watches aren't how you got started in media. And unlike a lot of the other sort of, I'll call them characters in our watch media space, you have experience from other industries and doing other things that you pull in. And you're like, no, guys, this is not how it's done. This is how it's done. So maybe talk a little bit for people that don't know you, some of the highlights of your career, sort of the major places you've worked and things you've done, especially outside of just watches.
Well, I went to school for art history and photography, and I always wanted to be a photographer. So I went from the yearbook.
The degrees that pay well.
Yeah, right. I mean, I grew up a kid of the 80s and was just loved magazines, and I love fashion magazines and style magazines. And so I went to school and studied photography, moved to New York, and I was a photo assistant. I paid my dues as an apprentice, but always working with these photographers that, were doing editorial fashion mostly when I first got here. And I just loved it. And then I broke out on my own and started shooting small assignments. And then I kind of developed this commercial photography career doing what I loved, which was working for all these amazing magazines like Vogue and GQ and Rolling Stone. And I just was like, wow, I can't believe I'm getting paid for this. Like, this is a real job. And then that lent itself to more commercial projects that kind of paid the bills. And then I started writing a blog in the early 2000s called The William Brown Project, which was very separate than my photo career, but kind of talking about all the things I intimately liked, which was, food and beverage and cars and travel and watches, but on a very, aesthetic level, not a deep technical dive in any of that stuff. And then I started, I had a show on television. Esquire was developing this TV station called Esquire TV. And they bought a pilot that we did of 6 shows called Alternate Route. And it was kind of a travel, lifestyle, Bourdain, wannabe-esque kind of show. And that was just incredible, like kind of dream come true. And at that point, I kind of started dialing down the photography and ramping up the more kind of editorial sense of stuff. And when that station failed, the show didn't get picked up again. It was just at the time when people were streaming, television and film. And
this was the early streaming period, yeah.
Very early, and nobody was paying attention to Time Warner Cable. Like my mom couldn't even find the show. It was like, It was just a wasteland. But at that time, my wife became the creative director at Condé Nast Traveler, a magazine that I had been photographing for in the past. And she said, why don't you come on? And my friend Pilar Guzman was the editor-in-chief. And they said, why don't you come on and be our men's editor? And I was like, cool, what does that mean? And they said, oh, you get to go to Geneva, you get to go to Basel, and you get to talk to companies about their watches. And I was like, oh my God, this is so great. So I became the contracted men's editor at Condé Nast Traveler. And that's when I started the indulgent world of the watch community. This is the first time I went to SIHH, pre-Watches and Wonders. This is where I first met you in Geneva. And I just was like, God, this is the best job ever, But I was looking at everything from a much more aesthetic point of view. I never had the technical aptitude to be technical. I was just really approaching this as kind of style aesthetics that I could apply to magazine editorials, and plus stuff that I personally really liked, And the car business was sort of the same. Like I don't know. I know how engines work. I don't think I could competently talk about them or, fix them. But it was sort of the same impression in the watch world. And then we all lost our jobs. We all got laid off from Condé Nast. Like the editorial world imploded. And I said to my wife, Yolanda, who was laid off from her creative director job, I was like, wow, this is great. Now we could do exactly what we want to do. And that's when I launched W.M. Brown, which was a men's lifestyle magazine that could talk about all the things I like to talk about under one umbrella. So watches and cars and food, it basically was an extension of my interest in the early blog days, And that just kind of took off. We found a very dedicated audience very quickly in a very niche way, which was good for me. And that continued my watch work. And, in the meantime, at Condé Nast, I was meeting all these kind of great watch characters and hearing all these terrific stories. And I thought to myself, maybe this is a good storybook, maybe I could approach the watch world in a way that best suits me, which was non-technical and it was more emotional. And that's when I wrote a Man and His Watch based on the emotional storytelling, not about costs or, I didn't know enough about that. All I knew is I was hearing killer stories about how guys got their watches. And I was like, maybe this would be fun in a volume. And we got Artisan to publish it. And now it's in 14 languages. So I don't know. We did something right, I think.
Yeah, thank you for all that. There's so much to unpack there. I don't even know if I'll be able to get to all of it because there's a lot of interesting things you said. One of the biggest areas that I think you touched on that I've been trying to have bigger conversations about is essentially this. The conversations people have around watches has a big impact on the types of watches they like or how they like watches. Mm-hmm. And this hobby, as you know, is interesting because different people can approach it from different interests, sometimes totally different interests, right? But you can be like a hardcore like tech nerd, or as you said, just into visual aesthetics and emotion, and still like watches, maybe different watches or different ways, but you're still a watch hobbyist. And I find that really fascinating. So I try to explain to brands a lot that the types of watches people like is often associated with the types of other external conversations they have.
Right.
Are they talking a lot about the love of drink, the love of food, the love of travel? Then they're probably going to be into emotional watches. If they're into cars and cameras and computers, they might want to know more about what's going inside, the mechanical part, the beauty of the finishing. That might be more interesting to them. And I think that brands are still very much of the mindset, well, we don't really know who's going to like us. They'll discover us, right? The right people will discover us. And that's like waiting for like planetary bodies to hit each other in space. Like it could happen. It's just going to take a long time.
Right. I mean, I always responded to watch brands that had strong lifestyle dialogue that maybe they didn't even promote, right? I think the easiest is the James Bond Submariner, right? It's like, or I bought a Speedmaster because I wanted to be an astronaut, all those things that relatable to what I saw in the lifestyle space that I wanted to have to be a part of my life. Those are the kind of brands I navigated. And then as I learned more about brands or, went to visit factories and saw the intense amount of detail and hands-on craft that went into things, and I'll throw a brand out recently, A. Longasona, I just was like, oh my God. I mean, I'm still learning this, right? Yeah. I just think there's so much to absorb out there. And again, you're right. There is a little bit for everyone in terms of what they're into. But even for me, I never even thought about, the amount of density that goes into the internal workings until I visited my first factory. And then all of a sudden I look at those brands differently. I think brands have a hard time sometimes telling their story. Because they have their own idea of what it is. And you're like, no. That's not it at all. You're missing this whole other thing. And I'd like to try to help, navigate a bit of that in the magazine, trying to demystify the craft and assimilate it into the lifestyle world,
I also want to talk about your sort of legacy career, because you're amongst a generation of people similar to me, but a little bit different. I'm from a slightly different generation, where your education prepared you for a world that ended up disappearing.
Wow, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Traditional film photography.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the biggest one that you and I grew up with, which is now quickly evaporating, is a curated look at the world. Right. In a big way. And again, correct me if you think I'm wrong. You were a curator. You went around, you found all these things around the world. You're like, you know what, for the readers, for the audience, whatever, I'm going to try to distill down the things that I think are cool. I'm going to help sort of separate the nice stuff from the bad stuff. And then the algorithm increasingly tried to do that for us. And we have everything from, on Netflix, where the algorithm tries to recommend what to watch next, or Google recommending maybe what you should buy when you have a particular need. It used to be human beings like you, like others, like me, that did that. And we're still around. We still have value, because fundamentally, I don't think software can do it as good as we can, because we bring an element of originality and spontaneity that they will never be able to do. But we're in a world that doesn't necessarily know how to monetize the value that we bring, because we're competing with free.
That's right. And, these people used to be called editors, right?
Yeah.
They would edit all that noise out there to create a point of view. And if that point of view fell under the aesthetic umbrella of, let's say, an Esquire magazine or Sports Illustrated, it was edited for the readership. And, another thing that I think is interesting about all that, and by the way, I like the algorithm sometime. I like stuff being fed to me that I had no idea, and I needed that weird night light that works on motion, like whatever is fed to me. Like, I don't get irritated by that. But what I do get irritated about is that we as editors can understand the high-low sensibilities, right, as well. Like, it's not all champagne and caviar all the time. It's like, where's the baseline cool, I'm a guy from upstate New York, so I always talk about, sometimes it's beer and chicken wings, and sometimes it's about, and that's what editors can put the lens on these things to create an aesthetic continuity, but with variety, interest, and surprise. And that's the fun part about being a curator or an editor, right?
I think that, as I sort of hinted to, there continues to be value where the humans are. I mean, I fundamentally believe that all these film streaming things, if they just had human curators, like different channels, you're like, oh, I like his or her taste, I'll follow them. Like video jockeys, there's the way that there was a disc jockey. Like, the machine could give you songs, but there's something fundamentally different when a human being does it, because we're human beings and we're looking for stuff from other human beings. And the best software can do is try to replicate what a human being might do.
Right. Well, here's a perfect example. I was on a flight once, okay? And there were these two nerdy guys sitting in front of me, and they were just talking nonstop about airplane movies, right? And I was like,
movies on airplanes or movies about airplanes?
Movies on airplanes.
Okay,
right?
okay.
And it was on Delta. There was all these new releases. And I was like, guys, okay, I got 8 hours ahead of me. Give me your top 5 out of these movies. These guys were so good. And they were talking about things that I would have never thought about. Or if you and I know each other reasonably well, you would have been like, you got to watch Twister 2, right? But these guys were listening to what I was excited and excitable about. And they were the ones kind of like building this little world for me that I don't think the algorithm based on my behavior would ever have built. And it was one of the best movie flights ever because I really went out of my comfort zone and followed the advice of these two guys that I trusted because I thought they were kind of nerdy and cool, you know?
I mean, I am an advocate for humans following human advice, and when you synthesize it, you can have problems. Again, and I don't mean to be pedantic about it, but the software is a great tool to help speed things up. It's not a great tool to remove humans from the process entirely. Like, the software should give human curators more information about what to curate as opposed to saying, let's just remove the human. Here's all the frickin' options. You figure it out, consumer, which is fundamentally not what consumers in the consumer economy want to do. They need, as people who have limited time and money, they need advice on how to spend. They can't spend and try everything.
Yeah. And I love doing those shopping lists as much as I love seeing those shopping lists where I can, kind of tune into a, friend's newsletter or even Instagram and be like, okay, just show me where to buy that stuff because I trust you. And I find that Yolanda has a lot of success with it with YOLO because she's tapping into this whole world of curators and getting their opinions and then distilling it. So then you have this insane amplification of cool stuff to go to buy. And I'm not just thinking in this kind of consumer world. A lot of it is about experience as well. Even the restaurants, like restaurants in New York are such a pain in the ass right now. It's like you can't get in anywhere. You can't just roll into a bar and sit down. And so I'm constantly ears to the ground talking to people that I respect saying like, okay, where's the place that nobody else is? And I know you're going to get me, Yeah,
you got to stay ahead of the curve.
You got to stay ahead of the curve.
Oh, so here's another thing that I think is really, really important. And I'm sure you'll agree. And I noticed this years ago and I felt stronger and stronger about it because there seems to not be as many people that agree with me. Now, what I begin with is the foundation that we are advice givers. And when it comes to luxury, we're giving advice about things that are often very expensive, right? If somebody wants to reward themselves with some type of luxury product or experience, they not only have very high expectations, but oftentimes they can't afford to sample all 5. So I've always felt a deep level of responsibility, almost a fiduciary responsibility. I mean, probably because, I'm a lawyer, to the people I give advice to about buying an expensive thing like a watch. Yet, it seems that so much of media today entirely lacks that responsibility. YouTube rewards, some novice coming up with a top 10 list that they just made up. Do you feel that there's a problem out there where people are looking for a good advice on how to spend their money, and there's so much, I'll call it, unsophisticated advice that just forgets that this stuff is so expensive? Are we missing part of that responsibility now? Again, not because of anything you and I are not doing, but simply because not enough consumers have responsible advice given to them. The algorithm doesn't care if you waste $5 or $10 or $50,000, but I'd like to think we should.
Well, I always listen to people. That's the first thing. When someone says, hey, I want to buy my first watch, I'm like, well, what's your budget? And they're like, okay, my budget's $10,000. And then all of a sudden the process develops from there. And it suddenly doesn't become, okay, if your budget's $10,000, oh, you have to be at this 50,000 mark, right? I'm also of a school of like, buy fewer, better things and surround yourself with quality and all those kind of things.
Yeah, of course.
Right. But I feel that listening and having the human condition to distill what you think what's going to make somebody happy is a big part of the deal. And I also think experience, like I always listen and trust people that have more experience than I do. And that experience is either reflected through their success, what I think they're capable of doing or what I think their talents are. And the thing about experience is it requires time. So I put a lot of weight on getting advice and listening to people that have experience, and also I think reflect I have a similar admiration or aspiration for.
I mean, and thank you, and that's good to hear that you take that opportunity when people ask you for advice seriously and give them the attention. But I think you generally agree that the consumer will spend more often if they fundamentally have faith in the advice that people like us give. Like this industry, it's a very social hobby now, watches, which means that people very often, if not almost all the time, base purchases on something someone else said. Mm-hmm. And I feel that if people make too many mistakes, I mean, they spend a lot of money on a watch that doesn't make them happy or they get screwed, they'll just stop and be like, you know what, screw this hobby. It's too expensive and risky. So I feel that there's the industry's best interest if people continue to spend, that the folks like you and I that go out there and help people, navigate this hobby, put some thought and substance into what we're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also, I really feel like, listen, I got involved in this when all these things that I have now, I mean, I couldn't afford to replace most of the watches that I bought through the years. But I was able to scrape enough cash to buy things that I liked and wanted. And I really pay attention, particularly people are, want to buy that one watch and they have this budget. And I kind of am very thoughtful about leading them down the path that's going to be their most rewarding and the best version of that thing that they could buy. I mean, these are big investments, but there's also, I think, a lot of great, smaller, more affordable entry-level brands out there that really, scratch the itch of wanting to be a watch collector or an enthusiast without having to spend tens of thousands of dollars.
So let me ask you on that exact point. I've noticed a lot lately that brands are leaning into the words accessible, entry-level, affordable, but they're being combined with watches that are often more than $5,000. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's absolutely correct that the industry needs to have more accessible price points, both new and used. But I'm wondering if brands today fundamentally are not in touch with what accessible is. Like Tag Heuer at a $5,000 to $8,000 level still thinks that that's accessible. And I think that it's not these days. What do you think?
Well, listen, you brought up the perfect example because I love that F1. I think that F1 is such a great watch. Yeah. It was the first watch I bought in '86. I coveted that watch. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And this reintroduction of it, I think, is fantastic. It's sub 1,000. What is it? 800? Is it sub 1,000 on that? I don't remember.
It's about $2,000.
Is it about $2,000?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was much cheaper product in '86. Even
it was like a few $100.
It was a few $100, right?
Yeah.
So that I think is really good. I think what I think is ridiculous, and you and I are exposed to this when we go to Watches and Wonder, some brand brings out like some flying Tourbillon with chimes and, and it's like, and it's a really affordable version of this at $150,000. And you're like, no, come on. I also, there are, there's brands out there that I own watches that I love. Like, I love Casio. I think Casio and Seiko make great watches.
Absolutely.
I put a Seiko on my wrist when I go, when I'm fly fishing somewhere and I want something cool but functional and, still appeals to my aesthetics. I think what Timex is doing is epic. I grew up with Timex. My uncles who were engineers at IBM, they wore Timexes. And when I see the evolution of the design ethos and the brand, I think it's some of the coolest stuff going on out there. And of course, I've always taken a deep dive in the secondary market because that's all I could afford.
Which today is a little weird.
It's tougher today. It's really tough.
It used to be where you get a used watch, slightly old or quite old, for next to nothing. And now it's totally different.
And the guy didn't call it patina, right? When he sold it to you, he was like, here's this beater. Do you want it? It's a 850, and you'd be like,
yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Like for every little bit of like terminology they pick up on the internet, they add another $1,000.
Yeah. I mean, I moved to New York in 1990. I was making $85 a day as a photo assistant. I was squirreling money away, and I used to just go window shop all the time. So I would go up to 47th Street, watch shops on 3rd Avenue, and there was piles. Yeah. The stuff I saw in the early 90s for $1,000, $1,000 I didn't have. It just kills me. But that's the evolution of the hobby or the community.
I'll say this: as much as I like to complain about high prices, I'm also very cognizant of the fact that we're living in a bit of a golden age right now. And what I mean by that is we're on the tail end of the infrastructure, I mean, the manufacturing infrastructure of we'll call it the original 20th century watch industry, when they were making watches as tools for everyone, right? It was like cars, like there was nice ones, but there was also just standard ones. A lot of that still exists and isn't making huge amounts of $300 watches sold in department stores. A lot of it's now making little micro brands and stuff like that. But eventually, this manufacturing capacity is going to go away. And the result is that we'll still be able to make watches, but there won't be the volumes made. So the prices for just the parts are going to go up. So compared to historic amounts that watches cost, we spend a lot today. But I still think that, as you mentioned, there's still enough of the affordable brands out there that the regular person who isn't buying luxury things can buy a few interesting, cool watches in their life and say that they can be a watch collector. I think in 20 or 30 years from now, it'll only be small batch production. And even if it's not precious metals, it's still just going to be, as you know, lower volume, higher price. So I think that collectors today don't know how fortunate they are, and there's still a lot of brands trying to fleece them. But the amount of good deals you can get on a watch today is unparalleled.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's only so many decades that new old stock is going to be around before it's a bunch of junky stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think what's great about these smaller brands that are popping up is like you get a lot of watch for the money a lot of the time, and you get a lot of design thoughtfulness going into it, because a lot of these guys were big brand watch fans to begin with and decided to kind of, you know, carve out their niche on that. And also, it's very insider baseball kind of clubby stuff when you see someone's wearing the same kind of micro brand that you are, you know, and you kind of look at each other like, okay, yeah, I get it. You're like my kind of guy. And also it's less obvious and more cool in a weird way. And I think, you can get involved in the process with, without the entry point. You know, I remember like when I was growing up, the cool watch to get once you made a little bit of money was a Rolex Datejust. And you could roll in to your local jewelry store and pick up the Datejust, right?
Anytime.
The fact that you can't do that, it just drives me nuts. It just kills me. I mean, and then what happens is, you know, you do fuel this secondary market, and that's maybe, you know, maybe you don't get the best version of the thing, or you don't know enough about it, but it would be so great to kind of roll into a bunch of these brands that are, you know, out there now and just buy the product, have access to it without all the drama and all the waiting and all the exclusivity of it. That part I find really boring. I mean, even though I am a huge Rolex fan, you know, I always have been. It was sort of what my dad had. But like, you know, it's just very frustrating, I would imagine, for somebody that wants to get into something at a slightly higher price point, but doesn't have access to it. It's kind of bugs me.
You're referring to an interesting phenomenon that I think comments as to how long it takes for people to create the desire to want to buy a luxury product. You talked about a scenario which is so common. Someone grows up, and during a foundational part of their life, there's a product that they see out there that they want. They can't afford it then. And then later in life, they're able to afford it. They still have that desire, and hopefully they're able to, you know, satisfy that desire. The problem is that because the nature of brands change, what that person really wants to do is be able to reward themselves. And what they should do is be flexible enough to think of another brand that can satisfy that, yet that's not the name associated with their experience.
Right.
So I think it's interesting how it comments on how we create desire. And then ultimately, while there's different ways, like there's other luxury watches you can get that isn't the Rolex, we're still tied to that because it's like the thing that we originally learned. And that stickiness, I think, helps sell a lot of watches, but it also makes people do a lot of very irrational purchases, right?
Well, yeah. And also, you know, Ariel, it's like there are this emotional connectivity that happens across these brands. You know, it's sort of like, you know, when I was growing up, like a Mercedes meant something, a Ford pickup truck, you know, aligned itself with a certain aesthetic point of view. And wristwatches did that. So like, I don't know if you liked your father or you admire the journey, you wanted to reward yourself in the same way. So you kind of stick to the brand identity that meant that to you. And I think, yes, there are many options out there. But if you get stuck in this emotional rut of wanting to recreate what you think is the journey, then you can hit the wall and be frustrated.
But let's be honest that recreation of the journey is so much what this industry sells. All these reissues, all this retro that.
Yeah.
It's completely designed to help somebody continue a path that started possibly decades ago.
Yeah.
Because they're, I don't know, leveraging the fact that consumers are so sometimes unwilling to change. I'm not trying to criticize anyone. I just think it's interesting that the same mentality that gets you into watches wanting to buy one can sometimes hamper your ability to make choices that are practical.
Well, this watch on my wrist, which is the reissue of the Heuer Carrera, that was exactly that purchase, because I wanted that original so bad. I mean, I looked at Road and Track. I saw ads for that. I just was like, and then of course the vintage version of that thing was unattainable, right?
Yeah, of course.
And then there was this reissue in the correct, case size and detail and everything. And I was like, oh yeah, now I'm going to find that watch. And that was exciting for me because it became affordable. It became, I was able to, again, scratch that itch without, taking a huge financial risk, and also not having to worry about being precious with that purchase. And, it doesn't matter to me that this was produced in the 90s versus 60s, because it's such a beautiful representation of the original design. So I am kind of pro reissue of vintage design, because I think that kind of takes the wind a bit out of the sail of the vintage market when some of this stuff just got so unattainable that you can kind of own a piece of that history without the sacrifice.
I agree. It's totally marketable, and it just boils down to giving a different person a chance to enjoy a design when they just the original. Sometimes it's not even that you can't buy. You wouldn't want to. It's fragile. It costs too much money. It's going to be, you have to repair it all the time. The new one's going to have better materials, water resistance, more durability, right. Like stuff you actually want. Yeah. But then, and I think this is where you have to be very wealthy sometimes in this hobby, is you get through those fantasies that you had as a child. You buy all those watches and you're like, okay, now what? Then you start to be open-minded. You're like, oh, what's this crazy new design? I hadn't thought about that complication. Whoa, that's futuristic. I'd never heard of that. But you sometimes need to go through. Some collectors never make it past that. Some collectors are still trying to get, like the car that they had on the poster in the room as a kid, and they never get beyond that. But if you get that, then a big world opens up to you. And I think that what you have so expertly hit on, maybe not on purpose, is that group of people who are still trying to aspire to get what they grew up wanting. And I think the word aspiration is so appropriate for so many elements here, because so much of what we're selling is not someone rewarding who they are, but trying to create who they want to be. And sometimes watch, almost like a costume, even if momentarily, when you wear that, you get to be someone you want to be, whether it's an action hero, a leader of industry,
an astronaut,
an engineer, a sex symbol. Like, there's a story that are attached to these watches, and you can sort of like exist in that story by wearing it. That's a very powerful function that these little wearable things serve, right?
Yeah, and that was very much the driver of the book. And those were a lot of the stories, from like Sylvester Stallone seeing Greg Allman on an airplane with that gold Submariner and thinking like, wow, that is success. Like, you look at him, he's making out with Cher, and look at this guy, rock star. And Stallone buys that watch because of that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I bought my first, every time I buy a Datejust, I think of my father, because that was his, that was his symbol of success. And you see that with like recreating that. And, that's why when I drive down the highway, in New York State, every time I see a like late 70s Corvette Stingray, like pristine thing. Or when I pull up a side, it's always the same guy of a certain age.
Exactly.
Like he had that poster on his wall and now he made enough money and he's buying that car. I suffer the same affliction, trying to like, fill those voids and those desires that you had kind of.
So here's a question. And I'm a little bit different with, I definitely have things I grew up loving, like if someone offered me like a mint condition DeLorean, I'd probably take it, even though it has a bad engine. With that said, I think to myself, okay, when I was a kid, I liked that supercar because it was fast and it looked cool. But now, like decades later, there's like other better stuff, which is fast and cool. Can't I just open my mind to having the same mentality as a kid, but wanting the thing from today? And I often am able to do that. I don't have to have that thing that I wanted as a kid, because I asked myself, it wasn't Lamborghini I wanted. It was just, or that specific model. It was like fast and cool for the time. That was the newest thing. I wasn't like in the 80s, I wasn't into a 60s car, right? I was into something brand new. Right. So I wonder if too many people don't ask themselves, what is it that I really want to feel? And is there like a better way today of feeling that than that thing I thought about decades ago? Well, here's what happens. You get mature and you get smart and you buy that thing, and of that period of when you first saw it, just to scratch the itch. And that thing breaks down and doesn't work. And, just like the watches, right? Like you're like, this thing is old and it's expensive to fix. And then you just get smarter and you're like, I want to be able to get in something, turn the ignition and go. I want to be able to put something on my wrist and like read it at night and, have it keep time and all that. And I think that's what's happened. Do I think it's important to do the itch scratching? I do, because I suffered it. Like I own the car that was on my wall. I'm still chasing watches that remind me of people and places and things. And, it's part of the game, I guess. This summer, soar into the wild blue yonder with Marathon, the Canadian maker of professional use watches. The SS Nav D Blue Yonder is now available. It's the first blue dial stainless steel edition of the combat-proven Navigator, originally developed in 1986 for U.S. pilots at Kelly Air Force Base. Housed in a steel case with a Parkerized finishing, this Navigator houses a Swiss-made, high-accuracy quartz movement. It's mission-ready and built to high standards. Self-illuminating tritium gas tubes and the hands and hour markers provide constant, low-light readability. Rounding out the striking blue colorway are a blue bezel and matching blue Swiss-made FKM rubber strap. Limited to just 500 pieces and never to be produced again, get your Marathon Navigator Blue Yonder watch before it departs for good. Visit marathonwatch.com. So this reminds me of a discussion we had at dinner with Chopard, right? You remember this? And on one side of the argument was Matt, who was basically extolling the virtues of vintage cars and how pretty they were. And then I was like, yeah, they're nice looking, but the moment you try to drive them, maintain them, everything, it all goes downhill. And I was outnumbered at this table, right? Because Mr. Scheufele, the family that owns and runs Chopard, they love vintage cars. He participates in the Mille Miglia. Like, he's clearly a classic car guy. So again, he was on your side. But I think it was very interesting because I firmly believe that those nice older cars are just way better to look at. Yeah. But I feel totally outnumbered because I drive with these guys that have the really, old Ferraris and Porsches, and every single thing is like, what's that noise? Yeah. Oh, that's going to be expensive. I got to call Mario about that. He's going to have to take a look at that. It's like, that's all it is. And I'm like, if you just had like a brand new Toyota Camry, wouldn't you be what would you complain about? Would you actually have to drive and enjoy it and not worry about all the bumps, and going 50 miles an hour doesn't feel like you're on the racetrack? You know what I mean? You are right. And what happened recently is Yolanda and I, my wife and I were in we were in Nice, and we had a short hour drive to make to another hotel. And a buddy of mine said, hey, listen, I want to make this drive memorable for you. I rented you this 280 SL convertible Mercedes, right? We came out, the car was so beautiful, right? It was the most miserable hour of my life. The gearbox didn't work correctly. We were in traffic the entire time. It was hot, and then we parked the car in front of the new hotel, and the doorman took our picture, and I was so happy. And Yolanda said, you don't like driving these cars.
You just like when they're parked and you could take a picture next to that car. And I said, you're kind of right. Like, I do just love looking at them. I always wanted a Porsche 356, but I was thinking maybe I just buy the shell,
Yeah.
and just put it in the garage and just look at the shell. I mean, it's a sick affliction. But, my daily driver, I could just get in and roll. And, I don't care if it's a Fiat Panda or a priceless Ferrari. When you're driving old things, you do exactly that. You're like, what was that noise? Maybe I didn't hear that noise. Yes, you did hear that noise. And
that's from the car. That's not the road. That's not the car next to you. Yeah. That's your car, sir.
You start making shit up, right? Just like
no, you hear the phantom rattle because every time you hear one, it's going to be a headache.
Yeah. That is why a lot of my cars sit in garages.
So so if you're into cars or around people who like cars, eventually you'll go to a gas station. If you're at a gas station, you'll experience similar to what you said at the hotel where the guy there is excited to see you. At gas stations in the United States, maybe other places, people will compliment you if your car looks like it's a pretty but pain in the ass. And for years, it has made people drive entirely non-practical cars. And I finally realized what people are actually complimenting, what the core compliment is. And I want to know if you agree with me. The compliment isn't just cool car. It's, I'm glad you're driving that so I don't have to. So I can look at it, know that you're going to handle all the headaches, and I just drive off and forget about it. And I just got to do my smile. So thank you for giving me a good day and handling this insane irresponsibility.
I think a lot of the people don't realize the pain if they don't own old things.
Oh, really?
I think they don't realize what's really involved. I will say this. It's a lot easier to own old watches because you just put them in the drawer, right?
When they don't work,
yeah.
Forget about it.
Yeah, they don't leak oil.
You are dead now. Go into the graveyard.
Yeah, just you're in there. Maybe I'll get around to fixing you if they find the part. But old cars, it's a problem. It's just a problem. Like all old things are a problem. I'm getting old. I'm a problem.
So, and I agree. It's sometimes nice to have things that operate because they remind us that some machines are engineered well. Have you had a watch that you didn't think you'd like, but you ended up liking a lot because it was a good tool?
I'll tell you a new watch that I bought that I always kind of admired. But again, like when it got remade and repackaged with better stuff, I bought it, and that was the Zenith El Primero.
Okay.
And I one whole summer just dedicated just wearing that watch, and it was so great to like jump in the sea, take a swim, not wear and have this really cool watch that a lot of people, it was off the radar of a lot of people, so they didn't quite know what it was. But I just was like, it functions as a cool tool watch. I love it aesthetically. And also I could go swimming with it and not have to worry about it. Like that to me was a great purchase. I just thought like, I don't buy a lot of new watches. And that was one new one where I was very, very pleased that I made the purchase of it because it really brought me a lot of joy, So
I'm unlike apparently most people in this field where I was always product first, not opinion or emotion first, but I saw all these things as machines in a vacuum, didn't always know what they cost, didn't necessarily understood who they were marketed for. It was just the machine. And I understand how watches work probably better than most people, not as well as some others. But I think the disadvantage that I have is that when I show people a design, I don't actually know how they're going to react. You have a better sense of that, I think. When you show somebody something, you're like, they're going to like this. For me, sometimes I have no idea at all. Of course, I have a special intuition, seeing all the feedback on aBlogtoWatch over the years. Mm-hmm. But I guess that makes me reliant on people such as yourself to know what others feel about it. And I think the sort of social media age has opened my eyes a lot because I often am very surprised. There can be like a great tool out there. I'm like, why don't other people appreciate this? Or there can be some, to me, complete piece of crap, bad tool that people fetishize over because, I don't know, some celebrity accidentally wore it in a photo shoot. And I'm like, I don't get that. And it's, do you agree that I'm sort of the minority that is just so hyper technically based a lot?
Well, I think there are those camps, right? I mean, I think the W.M. Brown reader who likes, the Scottish Highlands in a V12 Jaguar covered in tweed is going to like a certain aesthetic watch, right? They're going to lean into a tool watch or a military field style watch or whatever. And very rarely are you going to see much diversion from that path based on the aesthetics of, in this case.
So what you're saying is for them, the watch fits a larger kind of, I hate to use the word costume, but like an assortment of things you wear and places you go that go together. They have some idea in their mind. And yes, you have to wear a watch, but I need a watch that fits this thing. It isn't the best watch for this instance. It's the one that in my mind emotionally and visually fits.
That's right. Like a piece of outerwear or shoes or
Interesting.
A hat or a scarf. It becomes part of the stylized expression of. Now these are like I find like these guys really love watches, but they're dialing in, no pun intended, to a very aesthetically narrow point of view, right?
Where do these aesthetics come from? Obviously, they grow up around it, but I guess the question is, can new aesthetics be established? Like, can you get them excited about more things than just they grew up with so that they are more open-minded to new designs?
Sure. I'm sure. But
what's the way to do it?
I don't know, make it look cool, make it be cool, I think it can't be too far out there in terms of, it has to be able to be referential to something else, I think, And also, I really feel with watches, like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Like, in terms of design, I think that it's been done so well for so long. I don't feel, that it has to get more complicated. It should, in a way, it has to get more simple, I mean, there's some watches I look at and I'm like, how the hell do you tell the time on these things? What is this? What is this thing? Is it an expression of technical excellence? Or is it, I still use watches to tell time. That's why it drives me nuts if I have a watch that's not working properly. Of course, I could pick up the phone, but I don't want the phone to lead me down another path, right? Which is like, oh, there's a text and an email and a thing and a. I just want to be like, oh, it's 4:00. Like the first thing I do in the morning is, after having coffee, is I put a watch on. And I'm like, okay, it's 6:30 at 7:30, and I clock my movements of the morning with a timepiece on my wrist, not on my phone. Because I like to see where the time is going. Like I like to
You're analog about it.
I like to see that, okay, this hand means I'm running, and now I'm late.
Yeah, you're positional, and it's very literally analog. When this hand is in this spot, you know that you should be doing something.
Exactly.
When this hand is in this other spot, you know you should be doing something else, as opposed to a purely digital referent.
Yeah, and I think, it's funny. This is the first time I've really thought about how important that is to me, and how I kind of schedule and plan my day.
So if a watch doesn't have, I'm guessing a 12-hour layout, it's not familiar enough for you, and you have to be like, wait a minute, I have to learn a whole new set of positions, and that's why it's frustrating.
Yeah, I'm not, I can't. Or if it has too many if it has too much stuff going on and I can't discern what's what, it's not for me.
I've probably spent more time trying to get into the psychology of watchmakers and microengineers than others. And what I've realized is that, like all other artists, oftentimes they want to be original.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. You're right. The consumer wants something which is like 2 degrees different than that last thing they saw. But the engineer is like, I don't want to make the same thing as everyone. I want to put make my mark. So I got to make it totally different just because, so I can get like street cred with other engineers. And the consumer's like, yeah, it's different, but why?
Well, that's I'm all for like longer power reserves or thinner watches. Like I love all that stuff. Or, I was just at A. Langasona and I saw all the handwork going into the complications of these watches. And I was like, oh, that is cool. Like I'm so into that. But like when it comes to the external thing, I just like it the way it's always been. I don't think it needs to be more complicated. And I don't think the engineering should reflect the overall aesthetics, right? Like in cars, you had coach makers who design cars and engineers who put the stuff inside the cool designs. I think that is what I like about the watches that I like, you know?
Well, that's the wonderful thing about the industry. There's multiple cultures happening at the same time. There's the culture of making revisions to old classics, and then there's the culture of trying to constantly reinvent what the timepiece is. They both exist in the same industry, but obviously there's different consumers. I mean, I think that goes back to the beginning of the conversation when I said there's this whole variety of ways of getting into this hobby. That's what makes it so diverse. There isn't one type of mentality that says, let me appreciate watches this one way. If so, people will be wearing like one of 10 watches.
Right. I mean, I have a hard time, I look at my watches and I'm like, oh, wow, what's the choice to, what should I wear now? And now since I had to move everything into safety deposit box and it's not around to like just kind of pick and choose, I really put a lot of thought, like when I go to the bank and I'm like, I'm going to pull a watch out for whatever, the couple weeks or whatever. I look at them a lot differently now. And I realize, oh, okay, I like this for this. And this one fits into this climate and this season. And I don't know, it may sound kind of corny, but they start to speak to you differently when you really have to make the hardcore single decision.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's a fun exercise. I do want to say something. You say that you want them to come out with more of a certain type of just sort of like pretty simple watch. And I agree, but at the same time, don't you feel that there's too many objectively attractive watches out there that because they have no story associated with them, people are like, you're just another pretty watch for this price point? Like, why would I pick you? Like, I feel that to push people over the edge, actually get them to commit to buy something or to choose one product versus another, the ones that have stories that they understand or can retell always seem to get the edge. And I notice that brands are just like keep churning out, again, often objectively pretty watches, but there's no emotional reference. There's nothing to attach it to. So you're just like, pretty object, don't know what to do with it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, some brands just consider the same the design of this, the evolution of the same design, right? And it's been working so well for so long that it continues to sell and function. And I think, the Reverso is one of those watches. And I looked at them so long that finally I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. I need to own one of those. And I bought into the editorial of them. And at Watches and Wonders, you see the Argentine bootmaker making I'm a sucker for that, man. I was like, okay, I want to be an Argentine polo player. I'm going to buy one of those things. And I feel that, that to me is the driver always, how the editorial speaks to who and what I want to be,
So this is so crucial. So Jaeger LeCoultre did something quite interesting. They took a watch that had whatever it was originally, and they said, this is a sport watch, one, never really was. This is a polo watch, two, never really was. This has some relationship with Argentina, never really did. But they created a new thing, and they showed you, this is the Argentinian polo lifestyle, and look how nice this watch looks with it. You now have a visual image of that, and you're like, oh, I'd like to subscribe to that. But whether or not they did it on purpose or it's an accident, they created a visual reference in your mind that may have not existed before that then they can now sell against because there's demand, but they had to physically imprint that desirable image in your mind. Otherwise, you wouldn't know how to visually place this watch in your life.
But that, again, I think is strong brand storytelling, even though it may be a lot of it just created, It's
okay that it's created. That's fine.
It's fine.
Some people hate that. But I'm just saying, if they didn't create that experience where you did the Argentinian polo thing, you would have not been like, oh, Argentinian polo players, sexy guys I want to be like. You'd have no idea.
Yeah. But also, if I look at a brand like Cartier and you see, what the tank has represented in terms of, let's pick Hollywood. And you see Warren Beatty with a tank on, or you see like Keith Richards with a gold, Panther. Like that becomes evocative to the lifestyle narrative that I also like, you know? And, I think the tank is, for example, I have this Cartier book, and Warren Beatty, who is a big dude, is wearing a Cartier that must be like 28 millimeters on his wrist with a black tie, black tuxedo. And I was like, God, that's the coolest thing. I mean, if he could do that, and again, like I buy into the kind of aesthetic social construct of, brands that have a strong presence with their style notes as well. And I think Cartier for me I own that tank because, I don't know, I've seen it on Warren Beatty somehow,
Are brands doing a good job of making those connections today? There's a lot of artificial things they do. There's a lot of the whole, the red carpet game and all that. So they're trying to put their watches on it, but there's sort of that authenticity that came from some of that stuff from we'll call it between the 60s and 90s that was a lot more authentic and maybe useful. I just wonder if for the youngest generation today, enough of that is going on. I guess it's happening in some areas, but it's different, right?
Yeah. The single most irritating PR email that I get.
Oh, you hate them as well. I already know where you're going with this.
That so-and-so wore this on this event. I'm like, who gives a crap?
I don't.
I don't. And I know.
So happy to hear you say that, by the way. So happy.
Yeah, it's like some stylist put it on their wrist. They're not, I would say on very rare occasions, I know a couple of celebrities that like watches, and they're going to wear watches that they really, really like. I don't buy that, celebrity X is wearing watch brand X because they really made that aesthetic choice. I think they're either getting paid or the stylist was asked to throw this on them.
Or they're hoping for a free watch, which happens actually quite rarely.
Right. So I find that so irritating, and I admire, I guess in the celebrity world, people that really, I think, have their own kind of style game dialed on, and they're not being, and I feel the same way about red carpet dressing. They're not being dressed by somebody. They've kind of put it all together themselves. That's what that Warren Beatty picture was, right? Warren Beatty was at, I don't know, the Beverly Hills Hotel in a black tie, post some celebrity event, and you could just tell, like, Warren Beatty tied that tie, buttoned that shirt, and put on that watch. And that was to me.
He didn't walk into some style suite and get appointed.
That just drives me bonkers. And also all these websites, particularly in the, because I do have a foothold in the men's style world, that like are telling men to dress like clowns. I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, stop telling guys that it's okay to like wear those clothes. It's not okay. And again, it's.
What it reminds me of? You remember you've read American Psycho, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I got to actually interview Bret Easton Ellis one time, and he told me an interesting thing about writing American Psycho. He was in Manhattan when he wrote it, and he said that he was specifically trying to make all the characters look like clowns, that he had real fashion catalogs, and he was actually assembling. In the book, the author goes into great detail what everyone's wearing, right? But the reality is that even though he was going to great detail, he was dressing them like clowns, like a bunch of stuff that didn't fit together, like on purpose to joke about that. And it just reminds me of what you see now, because you see people who have other people telling them how to dress. They would never dress that way. And they look totally silly. They haven't chosen any of it. And then there's all these pictures taken of them like, so-and-so chose to dress these things, and these are his or her choices. And you're like, no, it's not. Like, it's literally a clown act. And the consumer is the one who's basically the punchline, in my opinion.
Yeah. I also think it's quite interesting in terms of menswear too. Is like, it's sort of like it's about my comment about the watch. It's like, stylistically, this stuff has worked so well for so long, right? Like a cashmere turtleneck will always look good. Like, a really well-constructed polo shirt and good denim, that will always resonate across style lines and generations and how you put that together. None of that stuff needs reinvention. Like I will always prescribe to this kind of classic point of view. I mean, I always say, like, I'm probably dressing pretty much the same way I did in high school as a Northeast preppy, but just like better versions of that stuff. And my fashion references are still like my dad and my grandfather on some level, And then I their current admiration goes. Like I live on the Upper East Side now. Like I can't walk by that Polo mansion without thinking like, God, I would love to look like that mannequin. Like if I only had that waist, it's like that, But I really think classic works for a reason. And you don't have to really divert much from that path. It works because it's good.
I completely agree, and classic is the safest way to go. But I just want to know your opinion. How do you get people open-minded to new? I am someone who is always seeking new, and I think it's because I kind of grew up admiring the tech industry, where new is what you were looking for. And I feel that there's so many new watch designs, experimental stuff, futuristic stuff, and so much of it gets passed over for too long. What would have to change in pop culture, the consumer mindset, to be excited about designs, especially in watches, that per se they've never seen before?
Well, I think Americans are kind of schizophrenic about their design interests, because Americans love a building that looks like it was built 100 years ago, but they want the coolest, fastest, most contemporary computer and music systems, right? So like there is a conflict aesthetically where I think, I find some European designs, where that are very, very forward thinking in their aesthetics that also approach the technical aspect as well. That's a very tough question. I think you're dealing with a culture that doesn't have a lot of design history behind it, and is always more apt to look back than look forward. And I think, I don't want to wear a futuristic looking watch, but I want a futuristic looking stereo. Like I want that thing to look like 23rd century. You know what I mean? So it's like, it depends on what it is, on how you sell it. I mean, people love that damn Cybertruck, and that thing looks like
it's awful.
It's
really ugly.
What the hell? I mean, that came from some aspect of the future, right? In some way. But I don't know. I think that it's a tough question. And I think people rather play it safe than not. And I think,
you're right. I have a soft spot for this stuff. I like it on an artistic level, but as you're saying, the difference between the watch and the stereo, what I'm realizing is that to many people, taking smartwatches out of the equation, a wristwatch is not state-of-the-art technology. So why would you have this fantasy of your watch of the things it can do when you very much know its limitations?
Right.
Whereas a stereo, there's this expectation, at least, well, it depends on the stereo, but that like, oh, it's going to do something better than the one before.
Right.
Whereas a watch, you don't have the expectations. You want it to look as nice and be as emotionally gratifying as the one before. So that definitely makes sense. I guess I just hope that something will change somewhere, because I love weird futuristic stuff. I like the merger of sort of futurism technology with my passion for watches. There are those products out there, but you make a good point about
that is you. Yeah. You're responsible for changing the point of view then, because and that's what sells stuff, right? Enthusiasm is so important in terms of the selling of something or the converting of souls. Like I find when I'm around people who are just like, I don't know, at a farmer's market, and they're like, you need to try this thing. This is the best root vegetable. And I'm sort of like, okay. And you just get seduced by the enthusiasm. You're going to have to be responsible for changing that,
I mean, I've definitely done my fair share. There's more I can do. I can predict the comments. They're like, "Oh, what is this robot turd?" Da, 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 da. And I'm like, it's fine. And I've seen people eventually come around. There's a lot of designs right now that come out that like 10, 20 years ago when they first showed up, no one cared. Now they're like coming back out with them as though they're like, new classics. And I'm like, where was everybody when they first came out? Like I was saying it was cool. Anyways.
Well, you're ahead of the curve, man.
I mean, I am, but I think it's because I hyper-focus on the product, like an art critic. I nerd out about it so that you don't have to, so to say. Right?
Well, you're an editor. I'm
an editor, so like you.
And you're editing for a very specific aesthetic and point of view. And people that will align to you will appreciate and really love that you're doing that. Like I think that's the beauty of the human editor.
Matt, we're out of time. I didn't even get a chance to talk about A Man and His Watch and some other things like that. I want to invite you back. But before we go, just so that you can plug some things, tell people just once again where they can find more of your stuff on the internet.
Okay, so I have a Substack called the William Brown Project on Substack that comes out every week on Sunday. I produce an analog magazine, WM Brown, which you could subscribe to and you could find on my website, the William Brown Project. And for all you Man and the Watch fans out there, A Man and His Watch 2 is coming your way soon. So I'm building those stories right now, which I'm super excited about.
Is it more men and their watches, or is it a man and his second watch?
There's more men with more watches.
Looking forward to hearing about it. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Matt Hranek. Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Until next time.